In my Domo-kun video, I went over how the stop-motion shorts of Suneo Goda and Hirokazu Minagishi built the foundation for one of the most beloved characters in Japanese pop culture, and how it laid the groundwork for their successful animation studio. I also went over the history of stop-motion animation in Japan, as well as the reasons that the art form isn't popular in the country. In the video, I give 3 major reasons for why this is the case. The first is the popularity of traditional 2D cell animation. The second was the reliance on importing stop motion from other countries that produced it. And the third was the history of Japanese special effects, and how stop motion wasn't used for giant creatures the same way that American cinema used them. But while editing the video, I found a potential 4th reason for why stop motion isn't as popular in the East as it is here in the West. In Japan, stop motion isn't viewed as a form of animation. It's viewed as a craftsmanship that is passed down from one generation to the next. As stated in the original video, Tadahito Mochinaga was the first Japanese stop-motion animation filmmaker who, aside from making his own shorts, also animated some of the Rankin Bass films, most famously Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. What I didn't go over was his truly crazy backstory, and how it accidentally led him to becoming a pioneer of stop-motion animation in the country. Mochinaga's first animated venture was as an assistant on the 1943 propaganda film Momotaro Sea Eagles, an anime propaganda film that depicted the events of the Pearl Harbor attacks. Following the release of the film, Mochinaga was tasked with helming a project known as Fugu-chan's Submarine, but it had a rocky development, ultimately leading to the unfinished film being destroyed in an American bombing campaign. Near the end of World War II, Mochinaga and his family would move to China, fearing persecution from the American occupation for his help in Japanese propaganda films. While in China, Mochinaga would work with Chinese filmmakers making animated propaganda pieces, ironically forming the groundwork for the Chinese animation film industry. Mochinaga's work was so influential in China that there's even this picture of him shaking hands with Mao Zedong. It was also in this time when Mochinaga would accidentally become the first Japanese stop-motion animator. While in China, Mochinaga and company were very limited in what they can do with their animation, due to the lack of materials the government provided them. Once they were tasked with recreating a propaganda comic, so to save on paints, Mochinaga would make puppets and shoot them frame by frame to simulate motion, with this short becoming super successful in China. In the early 1950s, Mochinaga would return to Japan, and brought back with him his new method of animation, which is how he created his first shorts and how he got the Rankin Bass gig. But Mochinaga was not alone in animating these features, as while he was making these shorts, he was also passing down his knowledge and skill to his apprentice, that being Kihachiro Kawamoto, who later became Japan's greatest stop-motion animator. Born in Tokyo on January 11, 1925, from a young age, Kawamoto was fascinated by puppets, in large part due to his grandmother teaching him how to make them. Kawamoto, a huge movie buff, would make a variety of puppets of famous movie stars in his youth as a hobby, but ultimately chose to pursue a career in architecture, graduating from Yokohama National University in 1944. After graduating, he would be enlisted into the war, and when he got back in 1946, he was employed by the famous Japanese film studio Toho as an assistant in their art department. In 1950, Toho would lay off several employees due to labor disputes, including that of Kawamoto, so for the next couple of years, he went back to doing what he knew best, which was making puppets. These puppets caught the attention of Tadasu Iwasawa, a playwright and journalist who was looking for an artist to illustrate a series of pictures for a children's storybook. Iwasawa was so impressed with Kawamoto's puppets that he decided to scrap the concept for hand-drawn artwork and instead use pictures of Kawamoto's puppets to tell the story. These children books would catch the attention of the previously mentioned Tadahito Mochinaga, who took Kawamoto under his wing as an apprentice, teaching him the art of stop motion and passing down the art form to a new generation. What sold Kawamoto on stop motion as a storytelling medium was when Mochinaga introduced him to the works of Czech stop motion animator Yuri Trnka. In particular, his 1949 film The Emperor's Nightingale opened Kawamoto's eyes to the possibilities of telling stories with puppets. Kawamoto would continue to work under Mochinaga, mostly doing stop-motion ads, and eventually co-founded Shiba Productions with Iizawa in 1958. Around the early 1960s, Kawamoto would get bored and dissatisfied with making commercials, so in 1963 he would send a letter to Trnka expressing a desire to learn under him. To Kawamoto's surprise, his idol would accept his offer, and for the next year he would study under Trnka in Prague. Among the technical advice that Trnka gave him, the biggest influence that he had on Kawamoto was to focus on mythology and culture from his own country, the same way how many of Trnka's works were often influenced by Eastern European folktales and fantasy. When he returned to Japan, Kawamoto would start on his first short, beginning his career as a director. Released in 1968, Hanaori, or The Breaking of the Branches is Forbidden, was Kawamoto's directorial debut. The film is about an old monk and his apprentice. The monk assigns his apprentice to guard a delicate cherry tree while he leaves on a mission. The apprentice is naive and goofy, falling asleep on the job. Two warriors then show up at the gate. They request entrance but are denied by the apprentice. The warriors then pour out some alcohol, tricking the apprentice and giving them entrance. Inside the base, the warriors decide to get the apprentice drunk, to which he blacks out. The two warriors then decide to break the branch off of the fragile cherry tree and take it with them. The next day, the monk comes back and punishes his apprentice as the credits roll. Many of the artistic choices and filmmaking techniques established in this film would proceed in many of his later films. The most obvious artistic choice is the framing and background, as it looks like the characters are walking on a 2D painting. This effect was achieved by putting the puppet on a short pole to give the illusion of depth. It's a bit hard to explain, but this behind-the-scenes footage from one of his later films kind of gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. Though many of Kawamoto's later films incorporate full-on sets, this style of having the characters walk on the backgrounds is something that categorizes many of his early and future work. The backgrounds are mostly styled after ukiyo-e art, which look absolutely beautiful and make the characters pop out from their environments. Though it was likely implemented as a technique to save money, it's a very charming effect, and the paintings work great with the mythical Japanese stories that Kawamoto tells in his films. Speaking of which, the film also incorporates many of Kawamoto's storytelling motifs. Like many of his future works, the film is a traditional morality tale, and has a heavy emphasis on the religion of Buddhism. Buddhism is a constant theme in the films of Kawamoto, whether it be more overt like in The Book of the Dead, or more thematic like in The Trip. Anyways, like many of Kawamoto's early films, we can't exactly gauge the success of Hanaori. It was an independent passion project, funded in large part by his advertisements with Shiba Productions, something that he didn't really like doing, but it was the only way to fund these more creative ventures. It's likely that Hanaori was screened at private events, and Kawamoto's works were spread by word of mouth, in order to gain more industry connections and such. Regardless, Hanaori is an important part of Kawamoto's journey, not only being his debut, but also how he implements the same filmmaking and storytelling techniques in his future work. For the next 2 years, he saved up money from doing more ads and put that towards his next short. In 1970, Kawamoto would release his second short, Anthropo-Cynical Farce. It was obviously made in Japan, but since it takes place in France, the dialogue is all French, and is voiced by French voice actors, and the only subtitles for the film are in Japanese only. At least that's the case for the Pioneer DVD, but we'll get into that later. The story is a bit hard to follow, mostly due to the language barrier, but it's about a ringmaster who's in charge of a dog race at a coliseum. He attaches fishes on hooks to make them run faster, which excites the crowd, but the ringmaster insinuates that they are no better off than the dogs. From there, the lights go out and one of the audience members shoots and kills the ringmaster. The rest of the audience then turns into dogs, while a single rose grows from the ringmaster's blood. Though many of Kawamoto's films are heavily based in Japanese mythology, this one is one of his few that's based on foreign ones. Aside from that, it also remains one of his most experimental in terms of plot and story. Farce is definitely a black sheep in Kawamoto's filmography, but 2 years later he would release one of his most defining works. Ani, or The Demon, was released in 1972, and is among one of Kawamoto's most well-known works. It's based on the tale from the 12th century anthology, Kanjaku Monogatari, and it's one of the most famous adaptations of the story. The film is about two brothers who are looking after their sick mother, who has had an extremely hard life. They go hunting only to encounter some strange occurrences on their journey. When setting up base, the one in blue climbs up a tree, only to be grabbed by an arm. The brother in orange aims his bow and shoots an arrow, freeing the blue one, only to discover the arm is that of their mother's. They rush back home to discover that their mother is a demon. Like mentioned previously, the film is among one of his most famous, and is a well-known adaptation of the tale. It's a very important film not only in Kawamoto's filmography, but also for stop-motion as a whole, as this could have been the first horror Japanese stop-motion film. Instead of Kawamoto playing his animation for comedy or surrealism, this one stays close to the story and plays it straight. The film was also the first time that Kawamoto would win an award for his work, winning the 1972 Noboru Ofuji Award, essentially the Best Animated Film category for the Manchai Film Awards, which are basically the Japanese Oscars. Kawamoto would also make friends with one of the previous and future award winners, that being Tadanori Okamoto, who made similar short animated films, some of which included stop motion either fully or partially. Throughout both of their careers, they would collaborate several times, as both are heavily linked together, and it was due to their collaborations which got them more traction in the animation scene, funding their future projects and being able to widely screen them. In particular, both Kawamoto and Okamoto would show their films at a special event that they created, named the Kawamoto plus Okamoto Puppet and Anime Show. The first of these events were held in October of 1972, and had 5 more events, the last being held in 1980. These shows not only played their new animated shorts, but they also did a live puppet show to fill the extra time. Taking a page from Okamoto, Kawamoto's next film would take a completely new approach to his animation style. Travel, or The Trip, was Kawamoto's 4th short film, and was released in 1973. The style of this short isn't stop motion per se, instead it's that of a paper cutout style of animation. It's about a Japanese woman who takes a plane into a surrealist world, occupied by mostly abstract art, such as the work of M.C. Escher, Salvador Dali, and Pablo Picasso. She is then guided by a weird man, who leads her to a tower before he jumps off the platform. From there, she runs off to discover more unsettling imagery. She traverses through this strange land and continues to see all types of weird stuff. It's one of those pieces of media that you can't really describe. All you can really do is see it for yourself. According to Kawamoto, the film represents the 4 basic sufferings according to Buddha, which are birth, disease, aging, and dying, and the film was also based on the 1968 Russian invasion of Prague, as this piece was also a tribute to Trinka. Out of all of his filmography, this short is definitely his weirdest and most experimental. Again, like Farce, it sees Kawamoto going outside his traditional Japanese comfort zone, by focusing his attention on classic and contemporary art outside of Japan. This paper cutout animation style would persist into Kawamoto's following film, which was released a year later. A Poet's Life is Kawamoto's 5th short film, and was released in 1974. It's an adaptation of a short story by Japanese writer Kobo Abe. The film is about a man who gets fired from his job, after complaining to his wealthy boss about the harsh working conditions in the factory. The man goes back to his home and takes a nap while his mother is hard at work, when suddenly she is transformed into threads of cotton. A neighbor comes by and requests the cotton to make a jacket, while the man wonders where his mother has gone. The next day, the woman hears the mother's cries through the jacket. She alerts the workers, who obviously don't believe her. She tries to sell the jacket, but nobody buys it, eventually taking it to a pawn shop. The factory continues to get worse and worse for the workers as the harsh winter takes away their souls, with the man at the beginning freezing to death out in the cold. The wealthy boss slowly begins to see the ramifications of his actions, as he too succumbs to the harsh winter. The jacket then magically flies to the sun and brings him back to life, the jacket being the only thing that has a primary color in the film, representing the warmth of humanity juxtaposed with the cruelness. Weirdly enough, Schindler's List would do the exact same thing, so maybe this film served as an inspiration. The man goes home and writes poetry about the beauty of life as the town goes back to the way it was before, with the workers being happy now. The short is a cautionary tale about the mistreatment of workers and how it causes a ripple effect within a community, undoubtedly fueled by Kawamoto's own experiences with Toho. Kawamoto would win the 1974 Ofuji Noboru Award, being his second win overall. This was the last of Kawamoto's paper cutout animation, as he felt he lacked the talent to continue in this direction. Thus, his next short would be done in stop motion, the animation format that he would stick to for the rest of his career. Dojoji, also known as Dojoji Temple, was Kawamoto's sixth short film, and was released in 1976. The film is an adaptation of the kabuki play adaptation of Musumi Dojoji. This wasn't the first adaptation of the play, not even the first one with puppets, as the first was a puppet film called The Girl at Dojo Temple by Kon Ichikawa, which was released all the way back in 1945. Anyways, the film is about two men on a pilgrimage. They stop at a woman's house for the night, to which the woman falls in love with the younger man, and tries to seduce him at night. The man tries to decline her affection due to his religious devotion, but it's implied that they slept together. The next morning, the woman wakes up and finds that the two men are gone, so the woman asks around town where they went. Two travelers then tell her that the men left, to which she chases frantically for the man she fell in love with, to the point where her feet begin to bleed. She catches up with them, proclaiming his love for the man, but the man sees her as a demon and runs away to the river to escape. The woman, heartbroken, turns into a demon and chases after the raft. The man escapes to the shore and returns to the temple, asking forgiveness for his sins to rid himself of the demon. The man is then instructed to pray under a bell to solve his problems, but the demon breaks into the temple, setting fire to the bell, reducing the man to skull and bones. Dojoji is often cited as a turning point in Kawamoto's career, as it marks the end of his so-called amateur works and the beginning of his masterpieces. While his previous shorts are also great, there's a significant improvement in quality between this film and his previous ones. This was in large part due to him having many crew members working on the project, including a young Hirokazu Minegishi, as Kawamoto would pass on his knowledge of stop-motion filmmaking to the next generation, as Minegishi would work as an assistant animator on almost all of Kawamoto's following works. Though there were many animators that worked with Kawamoto, Minegishi was definitely his right-hand man, traveling with him to Shanghai to make To Shoot Without Shooting, and Prague to make The Sleeping Beauty. The short would also land Kawamoto his third Ofuji Noboru Award, winning that year's Best Anime Film. On a somewhat personal note, this was actually how I was introduced to Kawamoto's filmography. It's what got me hooked on his work, and it's still one of my personal favorites of his. House of Flame was Kawamoto's seventh short film, and was released in 1979. The film is based on the No play called The Seeker's Mound. The film was about a traveler looking for the Seeker's Mound. He asks a group of maidens for directions, but gets no answer. He travels further to a river, where a woman leads him to the Seeker's Mound. They encounter a stone monument, to which the woman tells the story of Unai, a maiden torn between two lovers, a warrior and a poet, but she refuses both in hopes that it doesn't break either of their hearts, but it only causes them to fight even more. Ultimately, it leads to a duel between the two, but it ends in a draw, so she kills herself due to the pain. The two men are so grief-stricken by her death that they end up killing themselves to end their own anguish. Though they are now all dead, the pain doesn't stop there, as in the afterlife, Unai is haunted by the poet and the warrior in a never-ending cycle of suffering. Again, this film is a huge leap in Kawamoto's career, as it sees him attempting new and ambitious ways of bringing his visions to life. Instead of the characters standing or laying on the backgrounds like in his previous work, this time the backgrounds are legitimate sets, or at least they seem more three-dimensional than his previous films. As much as I love the unique look of his previous work, there's no denying the jump in quality in this film. Overall, this is one of his best, and arguably his most remembered. After directing 7 animated shorts, it was time for Kawamoto to embark on his first feature, that being the 1981 film, Rennyo and His Mother. The film was written by Kaneko Shindo, and was based off of the early life of Rennyo, the 8th head priest of Shin Buddhism. The film was largely produced by the Shiga Prefecture Buraku Problem Research Institute, with the film having many themes of discrimination. Even though this is Kawamoto's first feature, it sadly is the only film of his that is not available for viewing today. Because of rights issues, the film has never been released on DVD or online, though you can still watch a part of the film at the Kihachiro Kawamoto Puppet Museum in Ida, Japan. The museum has regular screenings of Kawamoto's work even to this day. The only thing we have of the film today are these screenshots, and there's been no plan to re-release the film on home media. After Rennyo and His Mother, Kawamoto would take a break from stop-motion filmmaking, and instead decided to make puppets for the NHK show Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which aired from 1982 to 1984. The show wasn't stop-motion, instead it was an actual puppet show, so Kawamoto had nothing to do with the filming, as he only made the puppets. Romance of the Three Kingdoms was a huge success, and as much as Kawamoto is remembered today for his stop-motion filmography, his involvement with making puppets for NHK shows, specifically Romance of the Three Kingdoms, is what he's most known for in Japan. Kawamoto became well known for making puppets for TV shows during this time, and it wouldn't be until 1988 when he would return to his filmmaking roots. Self-Portrait was Kawamoto's return to stop-motion. The film was made for the ASIFA project of self-portraits of animators, including other notable faces such as Azuma Tezuka and Jan Smonkfire. The short shows a claymation depiction of Kawamoto making a maiden out of clay, only for it to turn into a demon. I guess if you want to make a more critical assessment, the film shows an artist struggling with his creation, quite literally turning into a demon, but to be fair, I think that's a bit of a stretch. This is the closest that Kawamoto's films ever come to being cutesy. I wouldn't exactly call it chibi, but it's a definite departure from his previous work, and more or less resembles something that Dwarf Studios would make. And wouldn't you know, Minegishi was an animator on this project, so in a way I guess you can say that this is a prototype for everything that Dwarf Studios has done recently. The same year in 1988, Kawamoto would release another stop-motion short, this one adhering to the same principles of his previous ones, in both style and tone. The Shoot Without Shooting is Kawamoto's ninth short, and was based on a story called Meijin Den by Atsushi Nakajima, which itself is heavily based on a traditional Chinese tale. The film was a co-production with the Shanghai Animation Film Studio. The film is about a man named Chi Chang. He wishes to become the greatest archer in the land, so he seeks the guidance of a master named Fei Wei. Wei then instructs Chang to practice not blinking, saying the only way to be ready is if he can sleep with his eyes wide open. Chang succeeds in doing this, but when he returns to Wei, he says he's not ready and instructs him to train his eyes to see tiny objects. Again, he trains and ultimately succeeds, shocking Wei. Wei then decides to take Chang under his wing, and becomes so powerful that Wei has nothing more to teach him. Chang is determined to be the best at any cost, so he decides to have a duel with Wei. Chang wins the duel, and Wei tells him to study with a master named Gang Ying, who is more powerful than both of them combined. Chang then treks on a journey to meet the master, finding out that he's just an old man. The master then instructs Chang to learn how to shoot without shooting, which confuses him. Ying then does a demonstration for Chang, shooting a bird without a bow or an arrow. This shocks Chang, to the point where he decides to train with Ying for the next 9 years of his life. When he returns home from the training, the village congratulates him and Wei feels unworthy of Chang's newfound power. The film ends with Chang becoming a magical master in archery, succeeding in his goal that he set out to do all those years ago. Oddly enough, I always view this film as an allegory for Kawamoto's own career, as he too studied under the best, only to then take a journey to a foreign land to learn from an even greater mentor, and in the process he came back and became a legend just like Chang did. The lighting, cinematography, staging, and animation are some of the best of Kawamoto's entire filmography, just as much as the masterful storytelling. Briar Rose, or The Sleeping Beauty, was Kawamoto's 10th short film, and was released in 1990. The film was a collaboration with the Yuri Trinka studio, so it definitely feels the most European of all of Kawamoto's works, especially in the puppets and sets. The film is of course an adaptation of Sleeping Beauty, and is among one of the darker and profane retellings of the story, with Kawamoto getting the idea from Japanese actress Kyoko Kashida, who was previously in Rennyo and His Mother, and voices the lead in this film, and would later voice the narration in The Book of the Dead. The film is about a girl named Briar Rose. She's a princess that is dealt a bad hand at birth. Her mother is informed that when she turns 15, she will die, so she then goes to a fairy to prevent this. Instead of her dying, she will now be cursed into an eternal slumber when she turns 15. When she turns 15, Rose finds her mother's diary, revealing that before she married her father, she was in love with another man, but the man went off to war, and died, leaving her heartbroken. This turns out to be the same guy at the beginning who interrupted the ceremony. Rose goes out to see her mother's ex-lover, and they make love. She goes back home the next day but can't stop thinking of him, so she goes back only to see that the home has been deserted. She goes back home and begins to experience the signs of her curse, as her mother becomes very ill and ultimately dies. A prince then comes to the castle looking to marry Rose, as the film ends with this sentence. According to writer Kathy Hote's analysis of the film, the reason why Sleeping Beauty doesn't, well, fall asleep in the film has something to do with Kyoko Kashida's vision for the story, saying,
Kawamoto could have just been content to present a visually stunning traditional version of Sleeping Beauty, but instead he presents a feminist retelling of the tale in the voice of the main protagonist herself. The result is a film that not only critiques the way in which young women have been victimized by male authors of fairy tales, but also fingers us the viewers as willingly participating in this fictionalizing process that turns heroines quite literally into puppets. The question Briar Rose seems to be asking us at the end of the film really could be interpreted as, who is really pulling the strings in this story?
Hotes has done a number of write-ups for Kawamoto's films. I'll link her articles in the description if you want further analysis of many of his works. After completing The Sleeping Beauty, Kawamoto was hit with the news of Tadanori Okamoto's death. Prior to his death, Okamoto was in the process of making what would be his final film, that being The Restaurant of Many Orders, with his death leading the project without anybody in charge to finish it. The works of Okamoto and Kawamoto were and still are inseparable, as remember, in the 70s there was a period where their animated shorts would always win the Noboru Ofuji Award, one-upping each other constantly, so I don't think there was somebody who was more fit to finish the film than Kawamoto was. The film is an adaptation of Kenji Miyazawa's short story of the same name, and is done in the paper cutout style that Okamoto did for some of his works. It looks a lot like A Poet's Life, and even has the same thing going on with red being the only primary color in the film. We don't exactly know how much of the film was completed by Okamoto, and how much of it was finished by Kawamoto, and due to their similarities in style and the poor documentation on the making of the film, it's likely that we'll never know. I will say, however, that the film is way darker than Okamoto's work, and is more in line with Kawamoto's. Okamoto was known for his more cutesy and wholesome animated shorts, while Kawamoto's focused more on spiritualism and horror. As mentioned before, it looks a lot like A Poet's Life than anything Okamoto ever produced, so I'll leave you with that. Anyways, it wasn't the first adaptation of the story though. That honor goes to the 1958 Go Ano directed stop-motion short, which was actually produced by Miyazawa himself. This film adaptation was actually the first stop-motion short that was distributed by the Gakken Holdings company, so if you want some more Japanese stop-motion shorts, then check them out. Anyways, this adaptation is about two men hunting in the woods along with their dogs. They run through the woods and find their dogs dead, so they decide to keep searching for game as the fog becomes more prevalent. The hunters then encounter a mansion with a sign that welcomes them, and promises them food, to which the hungry hunters decide to enter. They start to examine the place, finding nothing but empty rooms, ultimately getting lost in one of those mirror maze things you see at carnivals. Lost and confused, the hunters then decide to blast their way out of there, with the stained glass breaking and the butterflies attacking them. After that, they encounter a locked door. The skinny hunter tries to unlock it with a knife, while the other explores downstairs. The film then abruptly cuts from that to the hunters taking a shower, to which they read a message that says, "There were so many orders. Yes, it must be a bother. Sorry about that. This is the last one. Please rub your bodies well with vinegar, salt, and oil." The hunters reading that decide to rush out of there, only to find that they're in an underground cavern of sorts, with a single table with glasses of wine and a waiter. The hunters are then encountered by 3 dancing women, who turn into cats and corner the hunters, while we hear dog noises, implying that the dead dogs from the beginning came back to save the hunters, as that's how the original story ends. The short ends with the 2 hunters being stranded out in the woods. A man in the car finds them and offers to drive them back. The short ends with the message: 2 men's faces had become like scrap paper. Although they returned to the town and took a bath, they never returned to normal. Though this short isn't technically Kawamoto's own film, I thought I'd include it in this retrospective. If nothing else, it shows the bond that Kawamoto had with Okamoto, and how intrinsically tied both of their works are. The film would actually win Kawamoto's 5th Noboru Ofuji Award, and Okamoto's 6th award. After completing Okamoto's The Restaurant of Many Orders, Kawamoto would again take a break from filmmaking, and return to making puppets for NHK. Specifically, he made puppets for the NHK show The Tale of the Heike, which was aired from 1993 to 1995. It was also around this time when Kawamoto would become the president of the Japan Animation Association, a role that was previously held by Astro Boy creator Azuma Tezuka, who had recently passed away. He would hold this position till his death in 2010. In 1994, Kadokawa's Shoten New Type Illustrated Collection would release a book titled Kihachiro Kawamoto Animation and Puppet Master. To this day, it remains one of the best sources of information of Kawamoto's life and career, and contains beautifully taken photographs of the puppets from his films as well as the NHK TV shows, and has several interviews with Kawamoto and his collaborators. Along with this book came a new appreciation for Kawamoto's works, whether it be his stop-motion films or his NHK puppets. So much so that in 1999, there was a documentary about Kawamoto's career, called Kihachiro Kawamoto Living with Dolls. The documentary was only released on VHS, and besides these screenshots, I was unable to find a rip of it. The only other stop-motion project that Kawamoto would complete in the 90s was a 1997 advertisement for Absolute Vodka. This was part of a collection of animated shorts that were all part of a campaign called Absolute Pananushka, headed by famed animator Christine Pananushka. Essentially, all the selected animators, including that of Kawamoto, were required to make a 10-second short including a bottle of Absolute Vodka. Kawamoto decided to base his off of the Chinese poet Li Po, or Li Bai as he's sometimes referred to. The collection of ads were viewable via this website, which was pretty innovative for the time in terms of marketing. It seemed like Kawamoto would be stepping down from film as a whole, but as the new millennium was beginning, Kawamoto would make yet another return to filmmaking. In 2003, Kawamoto would make his return to stop motion with the Japanese anime anthology film Winter Days. The film is based on the famous Japanese poem of the same name, with the 36 shorts in the film reflecting the 36 stanzas in the poem. Though Kawamoto is credited as the director for the entire film, he only animated 2 shorts from the movie, as the rest of the film is composed of shorts from a variety of different animators and directors. Kawamoto himself assembled a team of 35 animators from across the world to contribute to this film, showing off a variety of different animated styles. Whether it be stop motion, 2D, 3D, digital, hand-drawn, puppets, cutout, whatever style or technique, it is all represented in this film in a very beautiful way. Kawamoto is the only director who directs 2 shorts, that being the 2nd and 36th stanza. His animation quality has certainly improved, with it being way more fluid than before, but also adhering to Kawamoto's old techniques, such as the characters walking on the backgrounds. This mostly had to do with the change in technology and the rise of digital filmmaking, which undoubtedly helped with the production. Unlike most of Kawamoto's filmography, Winter Days had a behind-the-scenes feature that covered all the directors and their contributions to the film, including Kawamoto segments, which gives us a rare look into the making of his films. You can even see Minegishi animating one of these scenes. Winter Days is one of those films I simply can't do justice with my words alone. It's a work of art that you really have to experience for yourself. Out of all the anime anthology films I've seen, Winter Days is definitely the most unique and is a film that you should definitely check out. The film would earn Kawamoto his 6th and final Noboru Ufujii Award. In 2005, Kawamoto would release his second feature film, well, unless you count Winter Days. And luckily, this one is still viewable today. Shishin no Sho, or The Book of the Dead, is Kawamoto's last film, and was released in 2005, though it was released worldwide on home video in 2006. The film was based on Shinibu Urikuchi's novel of the same name, which itself was based on the real-life story of Shujo Heimei, a woman who translated Chinese Buddhist sutras to Japanese during the 8th century. Though many of Kawamoto's films are closely associated with the religion of Buddhism, Book of the Dead is the most upfront and obvious about it. The film is about a young woman named Iratsume. She's protected from the outside world for her safety, but has a fascination with Buddhism, copying sutras in her free time, and by doing so she forms a connection with Buddha himself. After completing her last sutra, she decides to go out into the world of the unknown and encounters a pagoda, finding a new sense of freedom she hasn't felt in her life before. At first she's denied entrance into the temple, but after revealing her lineage the men let her in, where she meets an old woman who tells her the story of Prince Atsu, a poet who was executed and whose soul is still traveling through both the world of the living and the world of the dead. Meanwhile, Iratsume's family is unsuccessful in searching for their lost daughter, but eventually the old woman brings her back home. The old woman, who is revealed to be Atsu's sister, goes to his grave and awakens him, to which his spirit begins to haunt Iratsume. For some reason, Atsu forms a connection with her, likely due to their shared beliefs in Buddhism. Through Atsu, Iratsume becomes more independent and becomes a leader to the women in the Fujiwara family, instructing them to gather large amounts of lotus yarn, and they make large cloths with it. This eventually turns into a giant mural dedicated to Buddha, as well as all of his saints, in turn setting the soul of Atsu free, as the film ends on the still of the mural. The animation in this film is so masterful, as the characters are very energetic, and the mouths of some of them even move when they talk, a rarity in most of Kawamoto's filmography. This was probably due to the added flexibility that the digital age brought to filmmaking, and you see a lot of digital editing techniques in conjunction with the traditional stop motion. The lighting and use of color in this film is also excellent. Whenever I think of this film, I always think of the color orange. There's a lot of miniature shots in this one as well, which was also rare in Kawamoto's previous films, as these help flesh out the world and make it more expansive. The film also features animation from Russian animator Yuri Norstein, who also did the opening stanza in Winter Days. There was also a documentary about the making of this film, called Amifutukami in the Sky, but aside from these screenshots, I was unable to find a rip of it. Book of the Dead is often cited as Kawamoto's masterpiece. It feels like a combination of the best aspects from each of his previous films, and really a celebration of his career as a whole. Overall, The Book of the Dead is a masterful work of art, and a fitting end to Kawamoto's filmography and legacy as a whole. After the release of The Book of the Dead, Kawamoto would retire from filmmaking. He would continue to be the president of the Japan Animation Association, and in 2007 the Kihachiro Kawamoto Puppet Museum would open in Ida, Japan. The museum not only displays many of Kawamoto's puppets that he made for the NHK shows, but it also displays many that were in his films. The museum also holds regular screenings of all of his films, even to this day. On August 23, 2010, at 85 years old, Kihachiro Kawamoto died of pneumonia, leaving behind one of the greatest legacies in the history of Japanese animation. Like mentioned in my Domo-kun documentary, Hirokazu Minigishi, who served as Kawamoto's main animator, would have a very successful career of his own. Along with Doma creator Suneo Goda, they founded the first Japanese stop-motion animation studio, that being Dwarf Studios, which opened in 2003. Since then, they've created several Japanese stop-motion animated projects, and have reached worldwide acclaim and success for their work, as Minegishi, like his mentor before him, is passing down the traditions of stop-motion animation to a new generation of animators. But Dwarf aren't the only ones keeping stop-motion alive in Japan though, as there are still several who to this day pay tribute to the work and foundation that Kawamoto helped establish, not just in Japan specifically, but also across the world in general. So you may be asking, well, where can I watch all of Kawamoto's films? And the answer is a bit tricky for some of them. Before they were released on DVD, only some of his shorts were released on VHS and Laserdisc, but since then they've been widely released on different platforms. Kawamoto's short films have been re-released on home video several times, the two most famous being a Japanese exclusive DVD by Pioneer released in 2002, and a 2008 collection by Kino International. The Pioneer DVD seems to be more pricey these days, while the Kino one is pretty common today. I can't find any definitive quality comparisons, but the footage from this video was taken from a rip of the Pioneer DVD, and I personally own a copy of the Kino one, and both seem to be on par with each other in terms of quality. So if you're going to buy one, then I recommend saving money by buying the Kino one. Although with the Kino one, you are missing out on Self-Portrait, To Shoot Without Shooting, and Briar Rose, so take that into consideration as well. The way I personally watched these films was via torrents I found, which seemed to be rips of the Pioneer copies. If you want an easier way to view these films, then you can also download and view them via Internet Archive, which again seems to be the Pioneer ones. As for Kawamoto's feature films, the process for viewing these becomes a bit confusing. Like mentioned previously, Rennyo and His Mother has never been released on home video due to rights issues, but is occasionally screened at the Kawamoto Puppet Museum, meaning that's the only way you can watch it today. Both Winter Days and The Book of the Dead have been released on DVD, but these DVDs can be a bit pricey, though again you can just simply torrent these films or view them via Internet Archive, which is how I got the footage for this video. For a while, the Kino DVD was the last release of Kawamoto's works on home video, but most recently in 2021, TC Entertainment released a Blu-ray box set of not only Kawamoto's short films, but also Okamoto's work as a double feature of sorts, which features brand new 4K scans of both of their films, which judging by the trailer look absolutely incredible. However, with this quality comes a premium price tag, especially if you add the shipping of importing them on top of it. You can kind of soften the blow a bit by getting Kawamoto's films separately, but if you're going to import this collection, you might as well get both together as they're great companion pieces. Hopefully Criterion or another publisher can internationally re-release not only all of these shorts, but also Kawamoto's feature films as well. In closing, the filmography of Kihachiro Kawamoto is one of the most legendary in the realms of stop-motion animation. I hope this retrospective on his work has done a good job of persuading you into getting into his films, as the only true way to experience Kawamoto's filmography is to experience them for yourself. My words, or anybody else's, can't do justice to the magic of his films. Kihachiro Kawamoto truly is the master of puppets and Japan's greatest stop-motion animator. May he rest in peace, and may his legacy live on forever.